So what we will cover today is why we hold the position we do. These are basic principles that we ascribe to. I think most of us share these fundamental ideas that we should have accountability with our public funds, that things where public funds purchased should be accessible to all, that a good public education is important for every child in Illinois, and that general funds are scarce and needed for many programs. There's lots of competition for our dollar that we send to the state. We're going to cover what the Invest in Kids tax credit program is in deep detail, and we're also going to look at why policymakers should oppose any extension of this program. And we will have time for questions and answers, so feel free to put your questions in the box, and we'll get to them in time. So first of all, the Invest in Kids structure, it was passed in 2017 as a 5-year pilot program. It was extended just for 1 year for this current school year. It is administered by both the Department of Revenue, IDOR, with some responsibilities also with the State Board of Education that I will call ISB. Donors receive a 75% tax credit from IDOR, up to $1 million for donations to a scholarship granting organization that I will call an SGO. The SGOs award scholarships to qualifying families for use at private schools recognized by ISB. And the tax credits are awarded by IDOR on a first-come, first-served basis by region until the limit of $75 million total for the state, or up to, which would be $100 million in donations, is reached. But to date, we haven't reached that limit in the program. The tax credits can go to corporations or to individuals. Individual donors can direct their donation to be used at a specific school, but not for a specific family. Donors to an SGO cannot also claim the same deduction in their federal taxes as a federal tax deduction. Okay, so just to dig a little deeper, what is an SGO? It is a 501c3 nonprofit that has been approved by the Department of Revenue. They are able to receive donations eligible for an Invest in Kids designation, a tax credit, and they can issue scholarships to families to use at qualified schools, qualified by ISB. There are 7 listed on their website. Big Shoulders Fund and Empower Illinois are the really big ones. The SGOs can keep 5% of the donations. They can use that money to lobby. They report to IDOR and they submit an audit to IDOR. And IDOR reports to the governor and to the legislature. So just digging a little deeper into what is a tax credit. If you get a tax credit, it lowers your tax bill, dollar for dollar, up to 75% of your donation is written off on your state taxes. So if you donate $10,000 to an SGO, you can take $7,500 off your state tax bill. If your tax bill isn't $7,500, if it's smaller than tax credit, you can carry the credit forward for 5 years. The tax credit is a state tax expenditure. It reduces the amount of tax revenue that otherwise accrues to the state. In contrast, a federal charitable tax deduction for donations to a 501c3 organization, your favorite charity, organizations that support the environment or health or a number of things, those donations can be taken off your income before you calculate the federal tax you owe. That's not available to donations to the SGOs, but a federal tax bracket ranges from 10% to 37%, depending on what your income is. So for wealthy donors who are able to take a 37% deduction, that is less advantageous to them than the Illinois state tax credit of 75%, which is extremely generous. The process for this program is that the IIK, Invest in Kids donor, files a request with IDOR for a contribution authorization certificate, stating that they intend to contribute a certain amount to a certain SGO. And then IODOR issues a certificate, and the donor has to make the donation within 60 days to the SGO, and the SGO then issues a certificate of receipt and awards at least 95% of the donation to some qualifying family. They can't designate which family, but they can designate which school if it's an individual donation. So who qualifies for this money? K through 12 students attending or applying for admission to a non-public school that is recognized by ISB. They have to have income under $120,000 for a family of 4. In the student's second year, it can, I'm sorry, 120,000 if it's their second year, 90,000 if it's their first year. Private schools have to be recognized by ISB to be able to receive the vouchers. They have to provide ISB with various data about their enrollment, contact information, and assurances that they will follow laws regarding immunization, reporting, or non-discrimination, building code safety, and other things like that. And they have to complete the registration process, which includes a site visit by ISB people and a committee. There's a priority for these scholarships to people who had them in the past, people who have income below 185% of the federal poverty level, or students in districts with low graduation rates or low test scores, or siblings of current scholarship recipients. So who is using these vouchers? We actually don't know a whole lot. We know some things though. The information has been a little difficult to find, and we are very grateful for Illinois Families for Public Schools for putting in countless hours digging and submitting FOIA requests to IDOR and ISB and trying to dig out exactly what is going on. And I'm going to turn this over to Cassie from the Illinois Families for Public Schools to tell us what they have found out and how hard it was to find it. Okay, Cassie, take it away.
Thanks, Anne. So I'll give you kind of an overview tonight of what we do know, and also information about what we really don't know about the program in terms of the data. So the reports that the SGOs have to give to the Department of Revenue aren't just on the Department of Revenue website. And so what you have to do is make a Freedom of Information Act request to get a hold of them. The actual individual reports aren't available at all. You just get an amalgamated report across all the SGOs together. And so we do know some basic things like how many students got a voucher in a year, how many schools got that money, and you know roughly like how many students per school, depending on whether it's more than 10 students. And we also know sort of the overall amounts that were contributed to the SGOs. In 2022-2023, that was 76 million. And so that from that, you can calculate how much was awarded in tax credits, about 57 million last year. But we don't actually have particular dollar amounts, exact dollar amounts per school. We just know the minimum a school might have gotten. So the reports come as PDFs of spreadsheets. We've converted those, and if you'd like to take a look at them, we'll share the links with these slides, or we can send them out afterwards. And unfortunately, you can get some of the SGOs put detailed information on their websites, but it's still not as detailed as even appears in the IDOR reports. So next slide. We do get some geographic information. We don't, you get the information about how many students per zip code are getting a voucher. So that's what's mapped in these pictures here. You can see that it's not geographically distributed super evenly across the state. Obviously, where there's more people, there's more voucher usage, but there's also some concentrations downstate in places. That really dark orange dot there in downstate Illinois is Effingham. Then you can see in the zoomed in map of the Chicagoland area, that there's concentrations in particular zip codes there. So this table, if you click through, that's the top zip codes or the number of students. So out of close to 10,000 students, almost 1,000 of them were all concentrated in one zip code. That's that really dark red zip code there, 60645 on the north side of Chicago. And if you click one more time, this kind of gives you just some rough things. So about 45% of voucher recipients live in Chicago. About a third of those are actually in a neighborhood on the north side of Chicago, West Ridge. And about a third of total voucher dollars, when we've labeled and figured out the house districts about where the voucher dollars are going, are concentrated in just 3 house districts. So there's some real concentration around the state of where these are in use. So next slide. A really important factor about the program is that 95% of Investing Kids students are attending a religious school. And so even though our state constitution says that we can't, as a state, allocate money to religious schools, the setup with these SGOs is essentially a way to get around that. The Supreme Court has said that states don't have to subsidize private education, but if they do, they can't disqualify some schools solely because they're religious. So there's really not a way to only fund non-sectarian private education with vouchers. So on the next slide, the reason this is a really important factor in the program is that religious schools can discriminate and not follow some basic civil rights laws that just don't apply to them, that do apply certainly in public schools, but even in secular private schools. So federal and state laws that enshrine protections for civil rights include, and also privacy, include things like Title IX, and also state laws like the Illinois Human Rights Act. And there's also many state laws that really regulate the school environment. And also things like learning standards and curriculum, how students are treated. And private schools really only have to follow some of those laws if they are registered and then recognized by the state. Religious schools are required to follow even fewer because those laws don't apply if you're a religious school. So that includes the Illinois Human Rights Act, for example. And so as we want to go to the next slide. So one of those categories of laws that don't apply are special education laws. So when you place your child in a private school, even if you're using public funds to fund their tuition, the school does not have to follow the IDEA like a public school would. And so like when we actually look at the schools that are getting public voucher dollars, the Investing Kids private schools, very few of them are serving any special education students at all. So this is data where we really had to look through and stitch together the State Board of Education data about these schools with the IDOR data. This is not the number of voucher students who are being served, special education. This is, does this private school serve any special education students at all? So only about 15% did. This was from the 2021-2022 school year. And compared to the public schools in Illinois, all of them had students with individualized education plans. And so that there's really, private schools are not serving the same population in terms of students with disabilities that public schools are. So here is a chart that's really talking about what we actually know, and we don't know that much about these schools. So we don't know the exact amount of voucher dollars that each school receives. We only know the minimum that a school must have gotten. The racial and ethnic demographics reported on voucher students are not the same categories that the State Board of Ed or the U.S. Department of Education uses. So we can't exactly compare across the voucher student population with the public school population. We don't actually know how many students with disabilities or English language learners are voucher recipients, even though the private schools that are getting a voucher for these students are getting a larger amount than they are for a general education student. And we also don't know whether they're then being provided with additional supports. There's not any information from the Department of Revenue or the State Department of Ed about that. We also don't actually have any information on how voucher students are performing in these schools based on standardized test scores. We'll talk a little bit more about that on a later slide. And we also don't know how many voucher students have previously ever attended public school. That is, if this program didn't exist, how many students would be participating or be enrolled at a private school anyway. So on the next slide, so the issue here is that we are using state public dollars, but we don't have a lot of information about where those dollars are going and what it's like in those school environments. And it's a big contrast with what we know about public schools. So state and federal laws really require a lot of transparency and a lot of oversight on public schools. And we know about academic outcomes of students. We know how many students are enrolled. We know about things like discipline policies. We know lots of detailed information about budgets and spending. For any particular employee, you know how much they're getting paid, and you can find out if they're what their qualifications are. And private schools, even those accepting these public funds from invested kids, we really only have to share minimal information with the State Board of Ed, and even less with the public about any of this. And essentially, after an initial on-site visit, you fill out a form, you get to have a visit, and there's not a whole lot of oversight going forward from then on, if you assure the state that nothing has changed from the year before. So on the next slide, this is kind of a particularly shocking contrast with public schools. If you've been in a public school as a student or a teacher, or have a child in public school, you know that there's a lot of standardized testing happening in public schools, and then there's a lot of reporting out about those test scores. This is not happening in the private schools in Illinois who are receiving invested kids dollars, even though it actually said in the state law that voucher recipients should participate in the state test each year, and the State Board of Ed should be issuing annual reports. We're in the 6th year of the program now, and there have yet to be any reports issued. What we do know from national studies of voucher programs elsewhere is that there isn't evidence showing that voucher students outperform demographically matched public school counterparts. And in fact, as research has accumulated over the decades of voucher programs, particularly in longer term programs that have expanded, we see that voucher recipients, not only there's not evidence that they do better, there's actually a lot of evidence that they fare much worse. And so we don't have this data on Illinois, but certainly the information from around the country is concerning in terms of the actual, very well done long-term research studies on the outcomes of these programs. So I am turning it back over to Anne now.
Once, right? Okay. So it also occurs to me that another thing we don't know about the donors to these programs is how many of them are getting up to $1 million in tax credits. How many are of the donors have seen this very attractive 75% state tax credit and are taking advantage of it, and how many are middle-class families who are trying to help the school that their child attends. It's just more information that we would really want to know before a program like this was extended, and we just don't know it. So, but anyway, I want to talk a little bit about school funding, because it's really integral to the whole issue of whether we should extend the Invest in Kids program. Illinois public school funding has been the most inequitable in the nation for many years. Districts serving the highest concentration of low-income students have had the least per pupil spending. Student achievement is actually closely related to education spending. As it turns out, money matters. The source of the inequity has been the state's failure to step up to its constitutional responsibility for funding the system of public schools. They have the primary responsibility. But the federal government is sending schools about 10% of their budgets. Nationally, states provide about 47, almost half of funding. But in Illinois, the contribution has been much lower for many years. Right now, it's only about 24% of school revenues in fiscal year 2022. So when the share is this low, there's so much pressure on local sources to make up the rest of what is needed for schools. Local property taxes and other local sources like the corporate personal property replacement tax can be accessed more easily in areas where there is property wealth. In schools located in areas without much property wealth, even with high tax rates, adequate revenues cannot be raised to support the local schools. And this has led to huge pew purple spending disparities between property rich and property poor districts. Where you live, what your zip code is, has for years determined how good your schools are. And we lived with that. And but finally, in 2017, the legislature acted to change that. They passed evidence-based funding to reduce those disparities through a new distribution formula and a pledge of increased funding every year for the next 10 years. And so this new formula sends new dollars each year to underfunded schools. They look at every district, they look at 34 characteristics of the students, and they calculate a unique adequacy target for funding that considers the cost to implement research-based activities to have an impact on student learning. They look at the student demographics, the student population, and regional wage differences. They calculate each district's local taxing capacity, looking at the EAV, the equalized assessed value of the property in the district, and they decide how much funding the state they add in how much funding the state currently contributes, and they decide what the adequacy target should be. And so they have been allocating $300 million most years. They took a pass in 2021 in the height of the pandemic, and they've allocated this money directly to the districts that are least well funded. There's 4 tiers where districts, we've got 800 districts. They've grouped them into 4 levels. Tier 1 districts are those whose funding is the least. They're far short of their adequacy target. Half of the new EBF funds are distributed to those schools, and the next almost half goes to the tier 2 districts together with the tier 1 districts. Tier 3, which is above 90% adequate, they get a little bit, and tier 4, the highest level, gets even less, but no district gets less than they had in the prior year. So your top spending districts are still top spending. It's just that they are less of a gulf between them and the tier 1 districts. And so currently, after 6 years of evidence-based funding, no district is funded at less than 60% of adequacy. When it started, there were districts funded at 47% of adequacy. And then there were some at 280% of adequacy. And today there's some at 375% of adequacy. So there's still a large gulf. You can see, for example, in 2022, Northbrook was spending $24,000 per student. Carterville was spending almost $10,000 per student. Still a huge gulf. The legislature set a goal of 90% adequacy, with that 10% additional from the federal government for all schools in the state within 10 years, and that would have been 2027. So here we are in 2023, and we are still far, far short of where we need to be. ISB says we would need an additional $819 million, not 300, but 819 in each of the next 3 years to fulfill the pledge that was made in 2017. So this impacts students of color and low-income students more harshly than other students, because the numbers of kids in those underfunded districts are disproportionately Black and Latinx. So there has been some confusion sometimes about how is there a direct connection between your local district's budget and invest in kids. And the fact is, yes, there is a very direct connection. And here it is. The biggest contributors to the general fund's revenues come from personal and corporate income taxes and sales taxes. And based on the expected revenue, then the legislature decides how to allocate the money they have, what the taxpayers have generously provided to the state to meet their needs. So when the legislature approves state tax credits, either for economic development or historic preservation or the film industry or for private school scholarships, the revenue shrinks and the expenditures also must shrink for the budget to be balanced. There are many competing priorities for the money. In addition to the schools, the state pays for human services, healthcare, public safety, higher education, but K-12, pre-K-12 is the biggest slice of the pie, 27%. The tax credit vouchers can divert up to $75 million from the income tax revenues that flow into the state's general fund. And when the revenue flowing into the state's general fund is diverted, then there's less to spend on education. The state is still underfunding education by $2.5 billion. And so diverting $75 million every year makes it more difficult to adequately fund public schools and meet the other demands on the general revenue fund. Currently at the funding rate, we're already so far behind that another generation of students will be going to underfunded schools. And it's time to stop the Invest in Kids $75 million diversion and put that money back toward adequately financing all of our public schools. The League believes that we need strong public schools in every community. 9 out of 10 kids attend public schools. They are in every community throughout the state. They're governed by elected school board members. And as a former school board member, I can tell you we were accountable to our public. They're subject to laws on transparency and accountability and open meetings. Public schools offer a comprehensive curriculum that is aligned with state standards. That is not the case in Invest in Kids schools necessarily, and they are free to all the community. They must respect and serve all children who come to them. They offer civil rights protections, and they offer special education rights. So again, this is why we are fighting Invest in Kids school vouchers. And I hope that you are a little bit fired up here now and are ready to go advocate to end this program. And so I will turn it to Marilyn to give us some tips on how we can do that.
Hi, it's good to be here. So what is the timeline that we're looking at here? January, I'm not sure who advances the slide here. There we go. Thank you. The timeline in the current law for the sunset of the Invest in Kids Act is January 1st of 2025. Starting January 1st of next year, there will be no tax credits for contributions. So the 2023-2024 school year, the school year we're in right now, would be the final school year for Invest in Kids tax credits. All provisions would be repealed on January 1st of 2025. That's the status quo. When the Invest in Kids Act ends, what you're going to hear, I think, from some advocates for it is what will happen? What will happen to the current voucher students next fall? Well, look at contributors can continue writing checks directly to schools or to organizations like the Big Shoulders Fund, and receive federal deduction for charitable contributions, just like they did before 2017. So there's lots of tax credit possibilities for them, but on a federal level, and as Anne had pointed out earlier, that tax credit is less, but it's still generous. While we recognize that some of the voucher students might be happy and doing well in private schools that have accepted them, we're hoping that those students will continue to have access to scholarships from private donors, just as they did before 2017. And as we pointed out, data from other states suggests that many voucher students actually might do better if they were in the public school system. The bottom line is that it should sunset because we want the state to use that scarce public money to support the 80% of underfunded public schools that educate the vast majority of our children. So what's another reason why we want you to be vigilant and educated about this? What's happening around the country? What we're seeing even here in Illinois in terms of some of what was proposed last spring during the legislative session is that there is pressure on legislators to continue private school vouchers. Private school proponents are pushing programs that started small, modestly, perhaps like you would describe Illinois. But as soon as the proverbial nose is in the tent, they push for expansion. Look at Wisconsin. In 1991, their program was 700,000. Today, it's 444 million in school voucher programs. Indiana went from 4 million to 241 million. And Iowa went from 107 million to $341 million. So one of the things that we want you to be aware of is that even if we are successful, and we hope to be this fall, in making sure that Invest in Kids sunsets, we will need to continue to be vigilant because there are proponents who are pushing these voucher programs and they'll come up again. So what can you do? What can we do as individual citizens? First of all, scan that QR code. And that will be great because it'll provide you with contact information for your legislators and you'll be able to then take direct action to advocate that they not extend this program any further and that they continue to advance the education-based funding. You can email them or call them, and we urge you even to consider visiting them. The League of Women Voters is going to have a lobby day at the Capitol in Springfield on October 24th. And so we're hoping to see a lot of you and a lot of us there advocating to let each of our legislators know that we want public money being given to public schools with the kind of oversight that we've been talking about here. So there are some other ways to advocate. Talk to your friends and family about it. Make sure that they understand this program. When you hear the name Invest in Kids, it sounds good. It sounds positive. It can make people think that it's a good idea if they don't understand the facts. So make sure that you share the facts. We encourage people to write letters to the editor so that the broader community can hear about it. And certainly reach out or speak to your school board, go to the meetings, and contact your federal Congress people and your local Congress people. We're encouraging people to also broaden our coalition. So if you're a participant in a PTA or a faith-based organization or a community organization, we encourage you to contact them and see if they will join us. You can see up here the list of more than 55 organizations that have endorsed this campaign. And this even longer list, don't go quite that fast, this longer list of names of faith-based organizations and good government organizations. So if you know of any other organizations that we can approach, please, we encourage you to do so. And lastly, the League of Women Voters has a social media campaign that we share on Facebook. So here are some places that you can look for more information. So you can email the League of Women Voters, Issues and Advocacy, go online and look at it, or the Illinois Families for Public Schools to join the campaign. I think Anne has already acknowledged our gratitude to the Illinois Families for Public Schools' hard work on this issue. I think now we're ready to go to questions.
Thanks. We did have a couple of questions, one of which I answered directly on the Q&A. I've been asked if the recording will be available online. We generally try to post our recordings within a couple of days of the event, and those usually are available somewhere on our website at wbil.org. So hopefully within the next couple of days, go ahead and take a look there. Another question that came up, Cassie, I'm going to give this to you since you did reply in writing as well. Attendee asked why the state Board of Education doesn't have data on outcomes for kids receiving vouchers.
So basically administering the state test to voucher recipients was supposed to start in the second year of the program. So that would have been the 2019-2020 school year. No testing happened for anyone that school year because of the pandemic. Testing should have resumed after that. So 2021 and then 2022 and 2023. We think that's taken place. Like there's a bunch of information on the State Board of Ed for private schools that have voucher recipients, you know, instructing them how to do the testing, but there just hasn't been a report issued. And so it looks like the State Board of Ed put out a bid to get a contract to write the report last year and signed a contract in the fall last year, and they just have not actually issued that report. We expect that it should be completed this fall, but it's really, you know, the General Assembly who should be asking for this and saying, hey, we said there would be annual reports. So there's kind of just no answer for this. I don't know why. I mean, yeah, the pandemic explains 1 year, and the reports are supposed to be sort of a, you know, year-to-year measures that they're supposed to encompass, but there's been 3 years of testing now and 0 reports. So
thanks, Cassie.
Okay.
The next question relates to the current temperature in Springfield related to the program, and wondering if we have a general sense for what our legislators are thinking with respect to their vote.
We have heard that they are meeting with their colleagues to try to evaluate the effectiveness of the program and measure it against the scarce dollars that are present in our general funds. And that's all we've heard. So I think this is a key moment to contact your legislator and let them know how you feel. They are, I think, being contacted a lot by the proponents of extension. We have seen, for example, in local town hall meetings where the representative and senator are publicly present to answer questions, that people have been showing up in large numbers wearing matching t-shirts, pushing hard to extend Invest in Kids. So if you hear about that opportunity yourself, you may want to think about attending a town hall meeting to find out what's going on and let your legislator know how you feel.
Thanks, Sam. The next question or comment from an attendee is that they believe parents should be able to choose the best fit for their child's particular needs. And based on the poor performance of many schools, why shouldn't parents be able to pick options for their kids? And if you don't mind, I'd like to take this one. I think that I want to make sure that everyone here is not being left with the impression that the League of Women Voters is anti-private school. We are in violent agreement that parents have every right to place their students in whatever school is the best fit for them. But what we're saying is that when you take public money out of already underperforming schools and then hope that something gets better at some point in the future for all of those kids that are attending those schools, that's not an approach that we favor. What we're saying is take the public money and get those schools to the state, to a state where every kid that goes there can have an improved performance. It shouldn't be lottery money where 9,600 kids get to have a supposedly better education than the kids that are in the community schools. We believe in public education as a way for kids to get a good education, and that's where we would like to see public money go. We are not anti-private school, and so I wanted to make sure that that point was clear. We have another question. Is there any information about the curriculum in voucher schools, requirements for science and fact-based teaching? And I think our comment here, I don't know which of you would like to take this one, but without commenting on religious education in any of the private schools, because obviously people send their kids to private religious schools for a reason. And so without commenting on that, if somebody wanted to take the science and fact-based teaching piece of this, please go ahead.
Well, Kathy has looked at a lot of the handbooks, so what did you find?
I don't mind taking it. So you can look at the regulations that cover registered and recognized schools, and the description of essentially the curriculum and standards aspect is really just a couple sentences long. And it says that the school must be teaching the topics that a school, basically schools in the area would be teaching children of the ages that the school teaches. So, and then it lists like science, math, reading. And that's really all the requirements that are there. So it's not the same sort of thing where we have state standards in public schools that have to be followed. So essentially, as long as you're saying, hey, we're teaching science, that's all the requirements. There's definitely some questions about the quality of curriculum at some schools. There's a really great detailed report from the Orlando Sentinel from a couple of years ago, looking at curriculum and basically curriculum materials in Florida's voucher schools. Florida has a very extensive voucher program, and there's a bunch of companies that provide materials that are of very questionable quality when education researchers look at them. And we have found probably at least a dozen schools of participating in Invest in Kids who are using materials like that. And so that is something, there's not oversight on that. And you can use some stuff that's pretty questionable. So I'll put a link to that Orlando Sentinel article in the Q&A so you guys can look at that yourselves.
Thank you. The next question relates to why the voucher system was extended to begin with. And I think the answer to that is it wasn't, but it's rearing its head again. And so, Anne, maybe you want to take that one.
Well, when it was first enacted, it was part of a deal made at the very last minute in 2017 to get the evidence-based funding passed. And it was, I think I just read, there were 3 different votes and they kept falling short. And they finally came up with this addition to the legislation to put it over the top and get just enough votes to pass this evidence-based funding that we had been working on for decades. Actually, the league pulled our support when the Invest in Kids program was added to that bill. But the bill, as far as I know, has never really been debated in the normal legislative process of being introduced and going through committee and then having public votes on it. It's been tucked into appropriations packages kind of at the last minute and hasn't gotten a lot of light of day or public scrutiny. Cassie, maybe you have more information on how those that last extension got through?
It was really just added to a very big omnibus bill, and those bills are extremely long. Lots of stuff is tucked in, and it was a very quiet 1-year extension, basically.
Thanks. The next question is, what kind of opinion does our governor have on this this act?
I think you'd have to call and ask him. You know,
And I agree. I think we all should. Yeah, I don't know that he's made public what his opinion is, at least not that we've really seen. Another question is, could we say more about the evidence that school funding and student outcomes are positively correlated? It makes sense that it would be, but understanding the data.
yeah, there is a lot of research that's done on that issue, and been a lot of resistance to the notion that more money and better funding for schools results in better outcomes for kids. But I can pull that together and make it available. I think it's been fairly settled now that in fact money does matter. And you know, when you think about it, that's probably why the districts that have access to money spend it on their kids.
Thanks. The next question we have is, if the majority of funds are used in a few zip codes, and then are primarily kind of in Chicago, are downstate legislators kind of in support of sunsetting this act?
I think you'd have to ask them again. They do need to hear from you.
Yeah, to have a more specific thing there, I think about half of counties in Illinois do not have a private school getting vouchers at all. And about 80% of counties only have 1 or 2 schools. So it really is, there are very large parts of the state that are not getting dollars through this program.
I mean, I think what we were saying about advocacy is that if you are attending this and you live in a downstate community, we're encouraging you to reach out to your state legislators and tell them that you oppose it and why, and ask them what their opinion is. But we're certainly encouraging everyone to ask those questions, but also advocate that we want money for the public schools to be, we want the public schools to be properly funded.
And can you just remind us what the maximum is that someone can contribute for tax credit?
$1 million.
$1 million. Okay, that's what I thought. Thanks. Are there any active peer groups working to fight?
No, I think I'm wrong about that. They can contribute 1.3 million for a $1 million tax credit.
Oh, so it's the 75%.
Yeah. Sorry.
Are there any active parent groups working to fight against invest in kids?
Well, Illinois Families for Public
I was
Schools.
just
is
gonna
a
say, I
parent
think we've
group.
got one on the panel tonight.
And like the Illinois PTA also has endorsed this campaign, and there are some other parent organizations as well on the list of more than 55 organizations that have endorsed the sunset.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that there are, like any issue, there are going to be people for and against it for whatever their personal reasons, and they certainly have that right. This is simply a position that, you know, we are taking, and we do have some alliances with other community organizations in that effort. Let's see, next question. Do we have a roll call on who's a firm no? I don't think we do we? No. Not yet. We're going to be taking up a poll as people do outreach and hopefully being able to pull that information together. Someone wants to know if the 75 million would be shifted directly to public education if Invest in Kids sunsets. And I think you mentioned that in yours, but go ahead and.
No, it would go into the general funds. And from there it would be distributed, you know, with a lot of pressure, we hope, to put that into EBF.
Another question, why do we think vouchers are so concentrated in certain areas?
So I'll take that. I mean, partly it's geographic. So we have more people in the Chicago area. There's more private schools and there's more kids to use them. And some of it is just there's schools that have been very efficient in making sure families apply for the tax credit scholarships. And so they're, you know, using more of the dollars. So I put a link to the map of schools, and you can see how much schools are getting and where they are with that, with a kind of an interactive Google map in the answer to a previous question. So that's kind of the best place to poke around to look at that.
Okay, I think you just answered another question that was out there as well. Additional question is, should people ask for meetings with their state legislators? I think the answer to that, you'll see a lot of heads nodding here on the screen. That is in fact one of the major objectives of our session this evening. So yes, please. And I think the last question, we have time for one more here this evening. Are there examples of discrimination against students or their parents, specifically with respect to LGBTQ parents and students or students?
So I'll cover that too. I think I was supposed to cover that in more detail on a particular slide. So Illinois Families for Public Schools, we've looked through basically probably a quarter of the schools' handbooks and websites and looked at the policies that schools have. Also, many schools are Catholic schools, and in that case, lots of times diocese level policy applies to, say, you know, several dozen schools. And so yes, there are absolutely specific examples of schools that have anti-LGBTQ plus policies on the books. And I'll put a link to a bunch of the examples that we have on our webpage that you can see. And yeah, so that's definitely, I think we maybe have found about, say, if you count schools that are covered under a diocese policy, like several dozen at least. Chalkbeat did a very good, thorough analysis of voucher school in Indiana a couple of years ago and found a pretty high percentage there. And no one's reported on it in Illinois, but I think probably a kind of a similar percentage would show up here based on how many examples we found just examining about, say, a quarter of voucher schools.
Well, and Cassie, I know that when we were talking earlier that also you had statistics or at least anecdotal information about parents with kids with special needs who were told that their kids wouldn't be welcome at certain of these schools because they weren't going to service them, and that sometimes kids in these schools who need social work or social services then end up going to the public schools, and the public schools end up providing it, even though they're getting a voucher to go to one of these private schools. So there's a lot of ways in which these schools are being allowed to engage in, you know, discriminatory practices that wouldn't be allowed in the public school system.
We're at 7 o'clock, and I want to extend a big thank you to our panelists this evening for providing some information to all of you, and again leave you with the message that the League of Women Voters is asking to have each of you consider your position on this. Certainly we hope you are considering ours, and to reach out to your state legislators to advocate that they allow this particular act to sunset. at the end of the year. So again, thank you so much for your questions and your interaction with us and your interest. And if you would like additional information, you're welcome to send it to issues@lwvil.org, and we'll see if we can hunt down an answer for you. Thank you so much.